billions of dollars. Fake patients, phantom billing, sham hospices popping up like weeds. California is being called the epicenter of healthcare fraud. Who's surprised? And the numbers are so big, they make Minnesota look like a warm-up act. My first guest is Dr. Mehmet Oz, the current administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the man now running Medicare and Medicaid for the entire country. And he went straight to Los Angeles and he blew the whistle.
This place has become one of the epicenters for fraud, waste, and abuse in America. $3.5 billion just here in Los Angeles County, we think, around hospice and home health care. Then you add in all the other things like they have in Minnesota, but in California scale, it's huge.
Alleging billions are being siphoned out of taxpayer-funded healthcare programs. Of course, California Governor Gavin Newsom fired back, accusing Dr. Oz of exaggeration, ethnic targeting, and even filing a civil rights complaint. So who's lying? Who's really getting rich? And who's really paying the price? Taxpayers, legitimate providers, patients left without care. And that's just half the story, because chaos is what seems to follow these massive fraud exposés. In blue cities across the country, police are being ordered to track and film ICE agents. Federal officers banned from city property. Taxpayer money is being used to fight federal law enforcement. But is any of this actually legal? Is the Constitution still the law of the land, or is it optional now? What does the Supremacy Clause actually require? Where's the line between protest and obstruction? And what are the real legal implications of Don Lemon's arrest? Constitutional attorney Josh Hammer will be with me as well to break down what legal remedies exist to end the chaos without tearing the country apart. Here we go. Keeping it real with Jillian Michaels. First of all, Doc, thank you so much for joining me. I know how busy you've been, and I really appreciate it.
Well, Julia, I appreciate all that you do. I appreciate your integrity, your honesty, and listen. As someone who's gotten into the the depth of knowledge required to address the government and the challenges of doing it, I know exactly what it's like to be you talking about stuff around health, for example, that people just don't want to acknowledge is real. And so instead of dealing with the battle, they just attack you personally. So
yes.
God bless you.
I mean, my goodness, I've seen that come straight from Newsom's office this week, but I don't want to jump ahead. So Doc, you were just in Los Angeles, right? And you called parts of it the epicenter of healthcare fraud. Now, before we get into the nitty gritty of this, what kind of fraud are you talking about, and what is the scope?
So let's talk about the kind of fraud, because it's particularly alarming that we're seeing hospices, which again are designed for people who are terminally ill and are going to die within 6 months. We see home health care. These are services provided to people who need desperate support in their homes. So they're trusting someone to come in there and provide these services. We see fraud in home and community-based services. These are the kinds of things that your family would do for you normally, but for whatever reason, your family is not around. So
Right.
driving you to a doctor's appointment, getting you home after hospitalization and taking care of you and bathing you and bringing the groceries up for you, do the shopping, all the kinds of things, again, that your family would do. But since there's no licensed professional involved in that arena, there's a lot of fraud possible, because I don't have a doctor's license. I don't have some of the classic things you have to tell if you had a hernia operation, where I've got a lot of different ways of figuring out that it actually happened. So that's the kind of things we're talking about. To put some numbers on these, there's been a 7-fold increase in hospice services in California. I mean, Jillian, unless there's 7 times more people dying in California than a few years ago, there's a problem here. We have home health care building in Southern California, in LA County in particular, that represents 9% of all of the billing in America, like the entire country.
Wow.
That's 5 times more than you'd expect. So again, just the numbers themselves reveal deep fraud. And the problem that I'm forced to tackle is, how did it become so systemic? Endemic. It's all over the place. When I was talking to whistleblowers and doctors who still were doing these sort of suspect practices, and patients who'd been harmed, I kept hearing horror stories where it's sort of commonplace now in Southern California to pay a doctor to get their patient into your hospice facility, to buy beneficiary numbers. So you go to people on Social Security and you actually buy their numbers. There's a whole market for this. You can buy hospices for a couple $100,000. I'll tell you, this is a true story. I was talking to this guy who owns 5 different hospices, which, by the way, in itself is a question mark of like, why do you own 5? I can just own 1 and do it right.
Okay.
They buy 5 because if you keep the number of patients in each hospice small, you don't have to report to the federal government. Anyway, he's building a massive house, Jillian, a beautiful house apparently, that he's telling me about with all these ill-gotten gains. The plumber knows that he's in the hospice business, and he says, hey, boss, guess what? I got a side hustle. I'm not just a plumber. I got a hospice too. And then the carpenter overhears the plumber talking to the hospice owner and says, hey, me too. I got a side hustle. So all the contractors own hospices. And I'm thinking, well, what's going on here? Obviously, people realize it's a gravy train. And because no one's watching the shop, everyone's walking in there and stealing as much as they can get into their pockets. And that's a problem. And that's the reason that Governor Newsom and I are having a little bit of a spat right now, because I'm calling him out on it. And he can make up stories about, why I'm targeting this group or that group. It doesn't matter to me. I know what's going on with the fraud in the area. These are federally adjudicated cases. They're court documents that he can look at himself. It's pretty evident what's going on. And it's not limited to just one community, but there's some places where it's so obvious. If you've got hundreds of these little hospices and home health care groups in one building, what gives? There's a possibility that the landlord of that building knows that he can rent out all of his offices to small-time operators who are fictitiously providing services. Wow. It's a hypothesis, but it's proven to be true in other parts of the country, like in Minnesota. I know it's also true in parts of California. So why not open your eyes and deal with the problem instead of attacking the messenger?
So I want to understand this quite literally. You just said fictitious. There's no hospice at all. So it isn't like they're running a hospice and then just billing for things they didn't do. They're buying my social security number, hypothetically, pretending I'm, let's say, a stage 4 cancer patient, and pretending to give me hospice care and billing the government for it. And there's no hospice happening whatsoever, like daycares without kids kind of a thing?
Well, I think it's actually a bit more complicated. That's what you described is actually true for durable medical equipment, where you're selling wheelchairs or knee braces, but not really. Okay. Those are called bust outs, where you don't sell anything to anybody. You never ship a product. You have no inventory. You have no cash flow. You have no employees. You're literally a fictitious building. And by the way, that's very common in South Florida. And in South Florida, it's actually the Cuban community that seems to unfortunately gotten pulled into this process. And the Cuban government, we think, is involved as well. Wow. In Los Angeles, it started with the Russian community. And we know that because when convictions were handed down, the perpetrators escaped to Russia. Literally, they ran back to their home countries. So these aren't even Americans involved in many of these fraudulent activities. Hospice is a bit more painful to admit. What happens in hospice is they'll knock on your door. You're, an older person, okay, and this young, healthy person says, "Oh, I love taking care of older people. I really want to be able to be part of your life. Can I help you? Listen, I can get you a free TV or something, but I want you to sign up for this program, which will help you get better care." And what they're really doing is tricking the person to signing up to hospice. Now, Jillian, this is really important to understand. Hospice works for people at the end of their life. The deal is we will give you extra stuff to make sure you're comfortable. In return, you give up your Medicare. You give up access to all the regular care you would normally get. And the company that does this takes that money that we would have paid to Medicare for you and uses it to make your life more comfortable. Now, if you're not ready to die because you're not terminal, when they do this, they pull you into a different system. They now no longer let you go back and get regular care. And I talked to a family whose loved one died. Her brother died after this happened because he could not get regular care afterwards, even though he was very treatable. Now, let's go back to the story. Okay. Why do I think this is happening? Jillian, if I told you were terminal, dying of cancer, God forbid, the chance of your dying should be, in many cases, 70, 80, 90% over the next 6 months. It won't be 100%, but it's going to be pretty high. The mortality rate for many of these hospices, follow the bouncing ball, is 0. No one dies. Now, that's highly unlikely that you got it all wrong, that nobody died on your watch. So we know that there are lots of these fraudulent facilities. Now, because they're so small, under 50 patients, they don't have to report. We don't actually know what's happening. Are they fake patients? Are they tricked patients? Are they patients that weren't going to die and they should never have been on hospice? Are they people with Alzheimer's who might not die in 6 months? It's a mix, but these companies hide behind this. And this is the problem. When I met with the U.S. attorney in Los Angeles, He was furious that he had not gotten leads to act on, because you actually need to understand how these scoundrels work. And they are diabolically clever. And I'm going to say it again. Many of them are foreign nationals supported by foreign governments. They send their money back to where they came from originally, and they escape to those countries when we come after them, which is why my job is to stop just trying to put them in jail, but actually act to never let them get started in the first place, which is why I came to California, visited with whistleblower groups, patient advocates. Some of our biggest allies in these investigations are the legitimate providers of hospice and home health care. Because, for example, the home health care business is being decimated around the country because so much of the money is getting sucked to Los Angeles. There's not enough left for the rest of the businesses, so they're actually shutting down. So they want us to do our job, and that's why I'm asking Governor Newsom, do your job. Stop obfuscating. Don't pretend. This is a real problem. People are dying. Act that way.
Dr. Oz, so California officials have said, we've revoked hundreds of hospice licenses. We're already policing this. So if they are, why does this persist in such an absurd degree? Billions of dollars. And what with regard to California? So is it the licensing rules, oversight gaps, political pressure, or the sheer scale of Medicaid spending? Why is California in particular so prone to this? State laws?
The state laws are lax. There's very limited oversight. There's, without question, in my opinion, concerns about, rubbing the wrong people the wrong way, losing voters. This is political patronage in many ways, I believe, as well. But, we have to actually look into the details of what went wrong. But let's just deal with this issue of hospices. There was a desire, because this was a problem 3 years ago, to slow down or stop the number of new hospices. But they announced it ahead of time. There were tons of new licenses given. There's plenty of licenses to cheat the system, even if you stop all new licenses. But when the governor started taking action, it was, limited steps. It's not, if you're really serious about what we're talking about, if you're watching the Jillian Michaels show right now and processing what we're talking about, you do not take small baby steps. I mean, these problems require an adult in the room to act powerfully, to send a very clear message. We're not going to tolerate this anymore. The Trump administration and President Trump has been talking about this and angry about it appropriately for some time now, is not going to allow Americans to be defrauded, because this is not just about Southern California, Jillian, and two important caveats here. One, when there's fraud in Southern California, who pays? It's not just the California taxpayer. Most of the money comes from outside of California, from the federal taxpayer. Now, that means people in New Mexico, and by the way, this is not partisan. New Mexico is a Democratic state. People in New Mexico who don't have much money, have a lower average income than in California, are paying extra money to the federal government so they can channel it back to Los Angeles to pay these fraudsters. So you're stealing from all Americans. And secondly, when you squeeze the balloon in California, these fraudsters flee to Nevada, where there's also been a 7-fold increase in hospice fraud. And then they'll go to Arizona, and then they go to Texas, which is literally what's happened. So we have to work together. My plea is collaborate, all the states, work with us. We need to make some national decisions, but I can't audit local endeavors like this. You have to put your people who are on the ground, know your areas. Unless you want the federal government coming in, and we know how to, if we have to, we'll come in with our auditors and our detectives and our forensic accountants. But you have people, you know your areas. You knew this was happening. I sat there in one of the city buildings in LA, and I was regaled by people furious that the governor had not taken aggressive action already. Consider this a wake-up call. But I have sent a letter to the governor. There's a 30-day time limit on this. I need to hear answers. I need to do my job, Jillian. I'm a surgeon. And the procedure started and the patient's bleeding, and we got to deal with the problem. I need more allies at the table helping me do this procedure, not less. I don't want people in the outside hallway yelling and screaming as they're pretending to wash their hands to come in and help, that, they don't want to be involved.
Right. Well, he did take aggressive action against you specifically. So he filed a civil rights complaint against you, arguing that your comments are racially charged and baseless. So let me get this straight. They've already acknowledged in California it's a problem, but it's baseless, and that they're racially charged, except that Armenians, according to the U.S. Census, are classified as white. as are Russians. So he defaulted to like the Democrat, like step one in the rule book, point the finger, call the person a racist. But it's also not partisan because you've just talked about Texas, Florida, and Nevada, all of which are red states. So why do you think that instead of cooperating, he has launched a war against you?
It's his playbook. It's how he responds to pressure. Some people do that. You probably know people in your personal life. You point something out to them that they're doing wrong. Their first response is not to thank you for trying to help, but to get angry at you for pointing it out. I also believe he's scared. You know, what's he going to do now? We just called out something that is so obvious. These comments that he's making they go literally against documents submitted in court. These are convictions that were obtained. The leader of the Russian mafia in LA fled the country. Yeah, I'm not making this stuff up.
Insane.
The neighborhood I went through in Van Nuys was just one of several I could have gone to. If that would happen, they just have a lot of folks from Russia, but I could have gone to other areas as well. But literally, the person who fled the country and the person who's now running the mob are both of Russian origin. So of course I'm going to point it out. It's not that making an argument about Russians. I'm making an argument about the fact that these people aren't Americans, or at least don't adopt our values.
Right.
But most importantly, you may not catch them. Because if you just go after them, by the time you actually get your arms around them, they're going to be gone. And that's the same argument I have in South Florida with the Cuban population. And we're having the Somalian population in Minnesota. But believe me, there are plenty of places where it's Americans doing the fraud.
Right.
It just, use the clues that you have. If the clue is massive increase in documented and proven fraud in hospice, go after the perpetrators. Stop shooting the messengers.
Dr. Oz, what can the average American do? If I'm watching this and I'm furious, I'm already furious about what's gone on in Minneapolis. I'm now learning that California is the next epicenter to explode with regard to fraud. And it's obviously not just going to be healthcare. I mean, we all know that there's $22 billion lost here on a homeless crisis, that Newsom just vetoed a bill which would allow extensive auditing into where that money went. You got $15 billion on a high-speed rail without one serviceable track. You've got billions into this care program that's apparently only helped 22 addicts. I mean, it's insane. What can just a regular person do to be helpful here?
Well, you got to actually tell the truth to the people around you. I have a good friend of mine. He's an older gentleman. He came from Eastern Europe. And he said the biggest problem that he had growing up was that he knew everyone that was talking to him was lying to him. But that wasn't the biggest problem. There was an even bigger issue, that he knew that they knew that he knew that they were lying. That's what I fear is happening right now. Everyone's lying, and they know they're lying, and no one's holding folks accountable. No. So it's hard to tell the truth. It takes a lot of effort. People are uncomfortable. You say things you wish you didn't have to say because you might be, upsetting people. I'm a doctor. My job is not to make sure you're not upset. It's to make sure you've learned something that can help you survive, right? Help take care of the person in front of you. And that's what I'm asking folks in California to do. Talk amongst yourselves, be clear on the facts of what's going on. But a couple of very concrete things. Do not sign documents if you're on Medicare if you don't really understand what they say. We will not send you a document to send back to us, but that's not really crisply delineated, and it's very rare if we do that. So make sure you're not being tricked. Take care of your loved ones. I'm asking young people across California, contact your senior relatives. Make sure they're not getting tricked or duped or being put in home health care they don't need to be in, or God forbid, sent to hospice when they're not that sick, right? And these are the kinds of these are incredibly powerful steps because we have to change a culture.
Yeah.
Right now in Southern California, it's expected that you can pay someone to refer their patient to you. That's all got to stop. And I've submitted several dozen names of doctors in Southern California to the U.S. attorney to go after because we believe that they're involved in fraudulent activity. Why? Because I see their names on multiple hospice patients claiming they're all going to live for less than 6 months. And when I read the documents, the medical records, they got a little blood pressure problem. You're not going to die in 6 months.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, my goodness, they have better actuarial survival than me and you.
This must make you so furious. Question for you, for anybody watching who would suggest, this is partisan. You're just going after Newsom because he's going to be president. You just talked about Florida. How's DeSantis handling the accusations of fraud in the Cuban community? Is he calling you a racist? Is he saying you're a liar? Are they cooperating with you over there?
Governor DeSantis is taking it like an adult. He knows there's a problem. He's been trying to get his arms around it. It's hard because the Cubans are very clever, and the Cuban government with using folks, we believe. And I was told that, by the way, by Mayor Suarez, who was the mayor of Miami. So these are not like baseless allegations. I think they're from people that are credible. And Mayor Suarez is Cuban. So he's saying, I'm worried about the Cuban government using Cubans who come here to do construction work, tricking the system and sending them millions of dollars. So that's what we need. And we need the same kind of responsible action in Minnesota. There are other states we're going to, and we are like I'm very passionate about taking care of our most vulnerable. I don't want to lose the money, but it's the people I care about, and that's who's being harmed with this fraud. So red state, blue state, doesn't matter. I'm coming to a neighborhood near you. We're going to clean this mess up.
Oh gosh, Doc, I love that so much, and I think people don't understand. Like, you're an exceptionally successful individual. There's no money in this. You're taking on personal attacks when you're beloved as America's doctor. Like, this is a true act of altruism. There's nothing in this for you except sleepless nights and personal ad hominem attacks. Final question. If you aren't able to get your hands around this, what does this look like in 5 years? Like, will there be less providers? Will costs be driven up? What are the long-term consequences of this kind of fraud?
If we don't deal with this fraud, we are going to become a massive healthcare system with a small country attached.
Wow.
The increased amount of money we are spending on healthcare is dwarfing that of the GDP of inflation. We're growing at twice the rate of the country's growth. And so we have to deal with it at many levels. And by the way, I have so many good people around me. Best part about this job, and it is the best job I've ever had, and we've worked together for years, it's just come in the government, because you got great people who want to actually make a difference. They're all mission aligned. But there are things we can do using AI, changing the way we improve the workflow. When you go to see a doctor, giving you better advice, meeting you where you are, so patients get better insights about their own health care. All those things are happening. But if we bankrupt the system by stealing all of the money out of it, we're never going to be able to reinvest it wisely. But the bigger issue is when you put people who don't need to be on these programs, you dilute access to service. You no longer can get the care you need. I'll give you a concrete example. That's not based in California yet, but it might be. In Minnesota, they thought they would be spending $3 million on children with autism.
Yes.
And they were going to invest this $3 million to give the kids who are there, and not every child has autism, but what enough do that there was going to be a need to pay families to help these kids get through their days and manage their issues. Fine. The budget now is $400 million. So forget about the fact that it's more than 130 times more money. Who's going to take care of the kids if all the kids are diagnosed with autism? Yeah. Why does every child have autism? Because they started paying moms to lie that their children had autism because they could get paid money. And the kids who don't need services now are forced to take care of services because we're paying the service providers to take care of kids who don't have a problem. So you understand that it's a perverse process where if you don't do it, they think you're dumb. I'm paying the moms, I'm paying the providers, the kids, God bless them, have no idea this is happening. And you're just ripping money out of the system, but also diluting care for the kids who need it. This is what political patronage and dishonesty in these precious programs does. And again, the money is not the primary problem. It's hurting the people who are most vulnerable. Hubert Humphrey, whose name is on this building that I'm in right now in Washington, he said something beautiful. And he's a Democrat, by the way. He said, it is the moral obligation of government to take care of those at the dawn of their life, which are our children. We cover 53% of kids in America. Most children are covered by Medicaid, by our insurance or CHIP. We have to take care of those at the twilight of life. Those are our seniors. Every great society takes care of its seniors. We're great people. We're going to do that. You've worked your whole life. You've contributed. We respect you for that. We would help you. So those are the dawn of life. Those are the twilight of life. And those living in the shadows, the kids and the adults, and also people in the shadows. We've got to take care of these people. Our fellow man needs our help. Cowardly acts, running from the challenges of dealing with corruption, of powerful forces who can influence what's going on in your life, who are uncomfortable to fight against. Nobody wants to fight the Russian mob in LA, but someone's got to do it. I mean, my goodness, they elected you. Go do your job.
Can I ask you, has CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, have they reached out for an in-depth interview to do an expose on this?
Not yet, but Jillian, with your help and many others, I actually think it's such an awkward problem to run away from. At some point, you've got to face the truth.
Right. Okay. Dr. Oz, I can't thank you enough for all you do. Is there anything I should have asked you about this that I didn't?
No, I want to know why you look so young and get younger and younger every day. Something's wrong here.
Because I still have the book you wrote like 20 years ago, the Owner's Manual, and I follow it to the letter of the law. You are a national treasure. I'm so grateful for all you're doing, for giving us this time today. Thank you so much. And we all have our marching orders. We'll take action. We'll do our part, sir.
God bless.
All right, everyone. As we kick off 2026, I'm all about bold action. Taking that idea that you've been nurturing and turning it into a reality. So whether it's launching your own fitness apparel line or your wellness supplements or just a passion project, don't let it gather dust. This is your year to build something epic. And with a tool like Shopify, there are just no excuses. They give you everything you need to sell online and in person. Hundreds of stunning customizable templates to match your brand, built-in AI tools that write killer product descriptions, generate headlines, and even edit photos in seconds. Marketing's seamless. You can create emails and social campaigns that meet customers where they scroll. And as you scale, Shopify grows with you, handling more orders, new markets, all from one intuitive dashboard. Millions of entrepreneurs, from breakout brands to solo creators, have made the leap. And I know the power of owning your own vision. I've done it. I have a business that uses Shopify called Alaya Naturals, and it's been a game changer for us. So get started today and make this your breakthrough year. In 2026, stop waiting and start selling with Shopify. So sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/Jillian. Just go to shopify.com/Jillian. That's shopify.com/Jillian and hear your first this new year with Shopify by your side. Let's level with each other. I'm guessing for a lot of you, the math is not adding up lately. Between the grocery store and those skyrocketing insurance premiums, even with a steady job, more families are being forced to rely on high-interest credit cards to cover expenses. If you're a homeowner caught in that cycle, carrying balances with interest rates in the 20s or even the 30s, relief is available. Right now, mortgage rates are at a 3-year low, and my friends at American Financing are helping homeowners pay off that high-interest debt at rates in the low 5s. Their salary-based mortgage consultants don't just push loans. They build exit strategies from debt. And on average, they're saving their customers $800 a month. Plus, if you start today, you may even delay the next 2 mortgage payments. There are no upfront fees or obligations to find out how much you can save. Call 866-891-4811. That's 866-891-4811 or visit americanfinancing.net/Jillian. Small businesses are the backbone of the American economy, but getting funding from traditional banks is an uphill battle. So of the 36 million small businesses in the U.S., over 70% report needing additional capital every year. Now, while revenue is at an all-time high, big banks are tightening standards and approving fewer loans than ever, leaving owners stuck with mountains of paperwork. But if you want bank rates without the bank delays, check out cardiff.co/Jillian for up to $500,000 in same-day funding. Cardiff is the largest privately held small business lender in the U.S., having funded over $12 billion since 2004. Their application takes less than 5 minutes, has no impact on personal credit, and approvals happen in minutes with same-day funding. Banks try to lock out small businesses. Cardiff has the key. Big banks may not want to approve your business loans, but Cardiff does. So if you've been in business for at least a year and you're pulling in $20,000 a month in revenue, apply now for up to $500,000 in same-day business funding at cardiff.co/Jillian. Again, that's cardiff.co/Jillian. Real growth, fast funding, Cardiff. Borrow better. Josh, I gotta tell you, when the world is inverting, I find that the first thing I want to understand is what's legal. We are a country of laws for a reason. All of this chaos should not be allowed. We have guidelines put in place. So as we're watching America descend into madness, these are the questions I ask myself. I want to start with what it means to obstruct or impede federal law officers. Let's start with this clip that has made the rounds. It's Alex Preddy kicking the shit out of an ICE vehicle, giving them the double middle finger.
This is a moment the news movement filmed on January 13th in Minneapolis, showing a man who appears to be Alex Preddy interacting with federal immigration agents 11 days before Border Patrol shot and killed him. Our footage was analyzed by the BBC, whose facial recognition technology confirmed his identity to a 97% degree of accuracy. They continued to hold the man down before they retreat and he walks away.
Okay.
The man in our footage is wearing a similar outfit to what Preddy was wearing on the day he was killed. What appears to be a gun is also visible above his waistband.
Now, listen, I understand the First Amendment and the right to peacefully protest. I understand the Second Amendment, and he did have a concealed carry license. I get all of that. What I've been struggling with for a year, watching all of this chaos unfold, is the fact that people are allowed to spit on law enforcement, damage their vehicles, throw cinder blocks at them, essentially threaten their lives, die, Nazi, fuck you. You've seen in the Signal chats, people talking about ways to hurt them. There's one chat that I just went into. It's like, okay, guys, this ICE agent isn't wearing a mask. Internet, do what you do. Okay, how are we here? Because what this looks like to me is, I would have zero problem seeing Alex Preddy in jail with a hefty fine. I'm not happy with him being dead. And I'm just trying to understand why it was allowed to get that far. That's question number one. Why in the fuck are they allowed to do this to begin with? Because it's hitting a fever pitch, clearly.
Okay, so a lot to unpack there. So, Jillian, it seems to me that after this video that the BBC and others have since unearthed, after this incident happened, Alex Preddy probably should have been in jail.
Right.
Because, I mean, this is obviously not okay. This is obviously a violation of the law. You very clearly see in the video there that the car is damaged. I mean, the bumper is like coming off there. You can't do that. I mean, at some point, Jillian, the line is breached from First Amendment protected speech to whatever this is. I mean, the line is somewhere between holding your dumb Soros from the sign saying, like, go away, ICE. You can do that. Stay on the sidewalk, chant whatever kind of, vile bullshit you want to chant there. That's fine. That's more or less, there are technically some very minor exceptions, but 99% of the time, that is your First Amendment right. That's fine. What you can't do is start spitting and throwing and assaulting law enforcement officers. And the fact that he has a concealed carry permit is great. Guess who also has a concealed carry permit? This guy. Guess who carries a gun every day? This guy. Yeah. There is no greater proponent of the Second Amendment than yours truly. I hosted pro-Second Amendment programming back when I was in law school. I'm all about the right to keep and bear arms. Guess what I also have, Jillian, and what I recommend that my fellow Americans have more of sometimes, is a little thing called common sense. Okay? I mean, there's a thing called prudence. So, for instance, when I was meeting, I live in Florida, when I was meeting a federal judge in Miami, I won't name him, it was a private meeting, I met him and his law clerks just for lunch about a year and a half ago or so. Guess what I didn't do walking into the federal courthouse in downtown Miami? I didn't bring my gun because I didn't want U.S. Marshals there to freak out. So I left in the car or I left at home there. These two things can very easily coexist. So if you know that you're going to go out to one of these ICE Watch sponsored, very sketchy Signal chat boosted, aided and abetted so-called protests, it's not really a protest. I mean, if you're going there for the purpose of spitting in agents' faces, probably leave your gun at home. But again, to me, it's somewhat inexplicable that he wasn't arrested and put behind bars with some kind of bail this first time there, because to your point, we wouldn't have gotten to the ultimate tragic conclusion of the story. And we all should be sad that he's dead, by the way. I mean, whatever you want to think about his political beliefs there, the fact is that a young guy who has parents, he has siblings, etc., he's no longer there. And it's a tragedy that this could have easily been prevented, for sure.
But Josh, why are we not? So this is obstruction, right? Impeding law enforcement. Citizens are not allowed to do this, correct? Right. They are tracking ICE agents in the Signal chats.
List of 2,900 plates of ICE agents, pictures of vehicles, and they've tracked them like 15 there, 19 there, all over the state of Minnesota. Do you not think there is something unhinged about this group?
They've got like an organized dispatch. They're keeping their license plates. They're following their cars. They're blocking them in the road. What is the law around citizens obstructing or impeding or whatever the heck? What is the law around this? And why are they not being fined? Why are they not being put in jail? Why is it allowed to get this far?
You can't do it. I mean, the very simple answer is that there's very clear federal law that you are not allowed to actively hinder or obstruct a federal law enforcement operation. I mean, there should be more prosecutions there. To be clear, we're now seeing more. We have Don Lemon and a few others who've just been arrested there.
So
we're starting to see
Don Lemon. We're starting Don Lemon.
Okay. I mean, we're starting to see more indictments there, but. Look, I mean, Jillian, my instincts are very much kind of, a put them in jail, throw away the keys kind of person when it comes to people that are spitting and getting in faces of law enforcement there. I would like to see, frankly, even more indictments, even more prosecutions than we've currently seen. But, it's not just the law. There's this whole culture that's been set there from the statewide and citywide leadership there in the Twin Cities and the state of Minnesota. They are setting a culture where it is not merely permissible. It's actually laudable to get out there and to get in these agents' face. Right. They're encouraging it. Every time that you hear Tim Walz compare ICE to the Gestapo, or talk about all these various other outrageous, hyperbolic, histrionic comparisons there, they are riling up people's passions, and they are trying to induce them to essentially become martyrs for the cause. The analogy that I drew on my show earlier this week, Jillian, was I said that this is basically the Hamas PR playbook coming to American city streets. So in the Israel-Gaza conflict, Hamas is infamous for having the most cynical PR strategy known to man, where they put all their rocket launchers and their mortars inside mosques and schools and UN facilities there because they want human shields. They want cannon fodder. They want people to die as martyrs for their evil cause. That's really not that different, I argue, to what's happening in Minneapolis there. People like Renee Good and Alex Preddy are getting riled up by demagogues. Tim Walz, Keith Ellison, these are demagogues. Right. They speak in very demagogic senses, and they're trying to rile up people to be used as Hamas-like martyrs for the allegedly greater good of trying to defund ICE or to try to get the Trump administration, however they would define it, I guess, in their own godforsaken words. So there is a culture of lawlessness. There is a lack of full enforcement of every single individual there. It's a delicate thing because if you go too hard there, you might get a reverse reaction. But ultimately, Jillian, the rule of law must be enforced because a society that does not respect the rule of law, that does not abide by the law, the rule of law ultimately, when push comes to shove, really is what separates civilization from barbarism. I believe that very firmly. Okay,
so I want to understand state law and federal law. So can you explain what is the supremacy clause? Because I thought I understood it, but I'm certainly not seeing it play out here. And why are states even allowed to become sanctuary cities and defy federal law? How is that legal? What is the interplay here?
Well, it depends exactly how a so-called sanctuary state defines itself. But let's start with the basics here. So the supremacy clause is a clause in Article 6 of the Constitution. There's 7 articles. It's the second to last one. And it basically says that this Constitution and all laws and treaties passed pursuant to it are the supreme law of the land. So that's the supremacy of the supremacy clause.
Okay.
And it's basically saying that, yes, American federalism has dual sovereignty where the national government and the states are both sovereign within their own legitimate spheres of sovereignty. But when push comes to shove, if there is a direct violation between state law and federal law or a municipal ordinance federal law is going to be supreme. Now, there have been some folks in American history who tried to water this down. There have been various attempts to arrive at this notion of so-called nullification, whereby a state or maybe even a city can just nullify federal law if they think it is unconstitutional. The most infamous of all these people in American history was John C. Calhoun, the infamously racist South Carolinian, who really kind of basically got us to Fort Sumter in the Civil War, honestly. Wow. Frankly, I mean, in the 1950s, after the Brown versus Board of Education desegregation fight, you had a lot of folks saying the exact same thing. I mean, Governor Orville Faubus in Little Rock in Arkansas, who famously had to have Dwight D. Eisenhower send in the 101st Airborne to desegregate the schools of Little Rock, he was basically saying the same thing, that we are not going to have federal law apply here because it's unconstitutional. And this here, there, and everywhere ends in tragedy. There is nothing good down that path. And unfortunately, you know, we know from the book of Ecclesiastes that there's nothing new under the sun. And yet again, here we have the exact same party. John C. Calhoun was a Democrat. Orville Faubus was a Democrat. And, you know, Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, I was listening to his press conference, Jillian, when they announced this Minnesota and Minneapolis joint lawsuit against the feds. There's a press conference a couple weeks ago, and he's there and he's saying the 10th Amendment, states' rights, this is an intrusion on our sovereignty. And I'm sitting there thinking, my God, I mean, if you take this guy from Minnesota and you put a thick Southern accent and it's like states' rights, the 10th Amendment, I mean, like we fought a war over this. I mean, that's really non-exaggeration there. So it's really, really playing with fire. To put a little more bones there, or a little more meat on the bones, I should say, here is how it actually works. So you are not required to direct local law enforcement to assist the feds. You are not required to expend your limited resources to assist the feds when it comes to an active federal investigation. What you definitely cannot do is undermine their work in any way there. So the entire notion of a so-called sanctuary city, it kind of depends exactly what that even means. It's a kind of this is really a neologism. It's a new term. It kind of came about during the first Trump administration there with the rise of these so-called sanctuary jurisdictions there. If all they're saying is just sit on your ass basically and don't do anything there, that's potentially okay. Here's where it gets tricky. Let's say that you have ICE that has a detainer for criminal aliens, someone who's in a local jail there, and they want them to assist them. So, you know, is it sitting on your ass, or is it obstructing the feds to let that guy abscond, to like free him from jail there? I mean, I would argue it's the latter. At that point, you are undermining the feds there. So at that point, that is illegal, I would argue, under the Supremacy Clause, under basic American federalism. I'll go one step further, though, actually, because the administration really can end this, I think. If Pam Bondi and the administration wants to end this, I think they can end this actually easier than a lot of other people are saying. So a lot of people don't realize just how much U.S. taxpayer federal taxpayer dollars, flows to local municipal police departments. There's a lot of block grants go to the states, and a lot of local PDs, these police departments, get federal taxpayer dollars. There's a Supreme Court case from the 1980s called South Dakota versus Dole. And we're not going to nerd out too hard, but what it basically says...
No. Okay. Please nerd out. I want to understand what they are allowed to do and not do. I want to understand precedent. I don't want to watch videos in slow-mo. I want to understand the law. Nerd out, please.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so in South Dakota versus Dole, this case, I believe, is from 1987. This is when the federal government was trying to raise the drinking age from 18 to 21 years old.
Okay.
And Congress and the Reagan administration had a policy, and they basically said that we are going to withhold all federal funding for the state's highways unless they agree to enforce the new drinking age at 21 years old. And the court said this is okay, that the federal government can threaten to withhold or actually withhold this funding because there is a nexus, there's a connection between the policy goal of a higher drinking age and the actual funding source, which is highways. You know, basically you want safer highways, people who are not drunk. So there's a clear substantive connection between these two goals. So take that to the current situation. What I've been saying for a year or two now, Jillian, is that what the DOJ and Trump administration should do is they should threaten to withhold every single penny of federal taxpayer dollars that ultimately flows to local police departments unless those local police departments actively assist, not merely not obstruct, but actively assist ICE and Border Patrol when it comes to federal immigration law. To me, that is constitutional under the South Dakota versus Dole precedent there. I'm not entirely sure, frankly, why we haven't seen it yet, but I could be wrong. I think that would go a long way potentially towards ending these so-called sanctuary city neo-Confederate bastions basically overnight.
You know, that's what I've been wondering is why has the federal government not been pulling the variety of levers, one you just mentioned, that I would imagine are available to them? I kept thinking like, okay, E-Verify. Why don't you go after business owners who employ people who are undocumented? That's against the law, isn't it? Defunding sanctuary cities like you just talked about. What other levers are available to them? What actually is the Insurrection Act? Like, when does it get invoked? What's the precedent for it? What would happen if Trump were to do such a thing? Is that like DEFCON 1 disaster time? Give me my options here.
So the Insurrection Act is a statute that goes back a very long ways. It was passed, ratified in 1807. So that's
Wow.
literally the Thomas Jefferson presidency. I mean, it's a very, very long time ago, right? The last time I believe it was invoked was George H.W. Bush during the Rodney King riots there out in Los Angeles. So it's been a ways, but essentially, so there is a longstanding norm in America that the U.S. military, so like actual Army, Navy, sailors, Marines, etc., cannot be used for domestic law enforcement purposes. And there's a Reconstruction era statute called the Posse Comitatus Act that puts that into federal law. The Insurrection Act is basically a statutory carve out. It's an exception to that, because when things get really, really bad and a state or locality has failed to prevent a descent into anarchy or outright lawlessness, that is when you can call in the troops, the literal actual troops, to enforce the law. And there is precedent for this. I mean, it's been invoked many times. Again, I think most recently was Rodney King, 1992. But I'll give you a very similar example, actually. So, look, God forbid. I mean, I'm not saying this is a direct analogy, but I have been kind of teasing out this notion that what we're seeing playing out in Minnesota and elsewhere is this neo-Confederate John C. Calhoun sentiment. Well, after the actual Civil War started, so these shots were fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina on April 12th to 13th of 1861. It was only a few days after that Abraham Lincoln actually invoked, you guessed it, the Insurrection Act there to try to quash what was then an insurrection. Again, I'm not saying that we're there yet. I'm not saying that this is literally a civil war. Okay. I'm just saying that the legal arguments are actually very similar when you think about it. Now, I'm not sure that this particular statute is a panacea. I'm not sure that it is a be-all, end-all there, but you really have to end the notion of these so-called sanctuary states. And again, I think that using the funding tool as not just a shield, but also as a sword, I think is an underutilized and underexplored tactic here. Also, I mean, don't discount the possibility of actually potentially throwing some very high-profile lawsuits. I mean, this administration has not been afraid to prosecute Jim Comey, Tish James. I mean, a lot of high-profile people there. I mean, what about the possibility of prosecuting a Keith Ellison, a Jacob Fry, someone who was personally actively obstructing federal law enforcement there? You know, some of these very high-profile prosecutions can also send a pretty clear message as well, I think.
Well, okay, so I just read that the U.S. DOJ issued subpoenas to Tim Walz, Jacob Fry, the mayor of St. Paul, whose name I still cannot pronounce, and others in connection with a federal investigation into alleged obstruction of federal immigration officers. Well, there's no question they're obstructing federal immigration officers. I've said this 1,000 times. I'm going to say it 1,001. The lieutenant governor of Minneapolis told people to lay their bodies on the line when it comes to ICE. They are telling these people to obstruct, period. Most of them are. And then you've got signal chats, and there's an investigation into whether or not these individuals are connected to that. And you've got this organization Defend 612 that has links to people, one of the senators in Minnesota. So, what is sedition? What is treason? Does when you actively work as a government official to impede and obstruct federal law enforcement officers, what would these subpoenas beget? Is this a crime?
Well, look, it depends on drawing this line between trying to stir the people's passions in a very demagogic sense, which they've clearly done, versus personally directing that assets deliberately not assist with the feds. So that kind of gets us back to kind of the jail example, right? So if you're a state or local penitentiary there, again, I don't think that you necessarily actively have to assist the federal government when it comes to trying to, round up aliens, send them to immigration court and ultimately, send packing if they're here illegally, et cetera there. But you definitely cannot obstruct federal law. So if there's a criminal alien and ICE has a detainer that they want this guy sent to immigration court and eventually deported there, then you cannot just send that guy packing. And if Tim Walz or Jacob Fry personally put in various requests to try to do that there, then it seems to me that they would potentially be on the hook for some sort of obstruction sort of charge there. Sedition is
what is that? What is sedition? What does that mean? I just hear it's like when you're undermining your government. That's my broad understanding of the term.
Sedition, treason is pretty heavy stuff, right? Okay. I mean, sedition to me basically means an attempt to overthrow the regime. I mean, the folks back in back in like the,
I'm like,
right. The men who signed the Declaration of Independence were arguably committing treason against King George III. They knew that, by the way. I mean, that's when they pledged their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor. So I guess some sedition can be morally just. I mean, America was basically founded on a morally just act of sedition. But I mean, given the fact that America is a generally functioning society today, sedition, like an attempt to literally topple, overthrow the regime, is pretty high stuff. And and that's a charge that in theory could also have the death penalty for sure attached with there. So I mean, I hedge a little bit when it comes to sedition. There was there was this whole debate about Mark Kelly, the Mark Kelly video.
Yes, with the senators telling the friggin' armed forces and the intelligence agencies to defy White House orders because if they're not lawful, who's determining whether they're lawful or not?
Right. So that's extremely dangerous stuff. But I also kind of hedged a little bit, Jillian, at that time there. I mean, is that sedition? Maybe. I mean, the answer is maybe. But that's about as tough a charge as it gets here. Sedition is historically really a true capital offense. So I try to hedge a little bit with that there. But I think some lower charges here, like obstruction of justice, obstruction of law enforcement operations there, that seems to be some much more easily obtainable lower hanging fruit.
It's tough because you want this to stop. I want this to de-escalate. Obviously, I think the vast majority of us do. ICE agents are getting their fingers bitten off. People are dying. And the reality when I look at these people who are resisting or they think they're part of the revolution, I honestly, Josh, I think they are doing God's work. They believe they are fighting evil. I don't think these are bad people. I don't agree with whatever kind of mind virus has infiltrated their thought process and their belief system, but I want it to stop. The question becomes, and I've seen Nick Freitas and Scott Jennings put this forward, and I must admit I've thought of it myself, is that when a city is behaving in an untenable fashion, right, like breaking into hotels, lighting shit on fire, kicking ICE cars, lights out, things like that. Do you turn down the heat because people are dying, people are getting hurt? But is that like having a 5-year-old that's totally out of control and letting the kid sort of dictate what goes on in the house because it's a real huge pain in the ass? And you don't want to spank your 5-year-old, or you don't want to put, who knows? They'd be in trouble all the time. I get the analogy. It's like you cannot let the lunatics run the asylum. Putting the law aside, what do you think Trump should do? So he just put this out. Turn over all incarcerated or active warrant criminal illegal aliens for immediate deportation. Transfer all criminal illegal aliens arrested by state and local police. Assist federal authorities in detaining criminal illegal aliens wanted for crimes. Democrats must work with the federal government in the rapid removal of all criminal illegal aliens. It's that simple. End the chaos.
Yeah, so look, I mean, no one wants to see more bloodshed. So let's get that out there very clearly stipulated. I think that everyone agrees with that. The question is how to do that. And the problem, Jillian, is that if you start bending the knee to Minnesota, you're going to get Brandon Johnson, the communist in Chicago, and Zohran Mamdani, the communist in New York City. They're going to start licking their chops and saying, wow, it looks like I can get away with a lot if I start protesting in there. And then these even bigger cities, the Minneapolis, could start to go to hell in a handbasket, or at least even more so than now. So, there's probably some sort of prudential sweet spot. Those quotes that you just read me from Tom Homan seem to me to be pretty reasonable. Personally, I am of the opinion that if you are here illegally, period, full stop, end of story, that is sufficient reason to deport you. By the way, that was a very bipartisan opinion as recently as like 2 or 3 decades ago. There was literally this clip of Bill Clinton speaking in the State of the Union address in 1995 saying exactly what I just said. So this wasn't that controversial, but it definitely makes sense to start with those who have committed heinous crimes, which, by the way, ICE typically actually does that. ICE is not, contrary to popular belief, they're not really going door to door, just trying to throw out the random guy picking strawberries or the Home Depot worker. I mean, there's a little bit of that, but they're overwhelmingly focusing on gangbangers, transnational criminals, pimps, murderers, rapists. They really are mostly focusing on the worst there. So they're already doing actually a lot of this there. But ultimately, Jillian, the law has to be enforced. And if you don't like federal immigration law, that's your prerogative. The way to change that is to lobby your member of Congress to change immigration law. It is not to get out there and to start kicking cars, to start spitting in Asians' faces. And unless and until the law is changed, the law has to be enforced. And by the way, I know you said not to mention the law, but I'll throw out just one more provision. Yeah. Look, so there's, we mentioned the Article 6 Supremacy Clause. There's another more obscure constitutional provision that I think is very relevant here. It's in Article 4 of the Constitution. It's called the Guarantee Clause. And it basically says that the United States shall guarantee a Republican form of government to all the states, which basically means that, again, when you have a state of anarchy or lawlessness, then the federal government is constitutionally required to ensure that there is something that we can recognize as a true lowercase r Republican form of government there. Now, have we reached that threshold in Minnesota? Again, lawyers can differ on that. I think most people can differ on that one. But the point is that there is something of an obligation of the feds to restore order when order is simply not being had there. And that really fundamentally is how I view this there. So is there something of a middle ground there? Sure. I think the feds are being very conciliatory right now, frankly. I wouldn't trust these Minnesota Democrats for the life of me. I don't believe a darn word that I hear from a Tim Walz or a Jacob Frey or any of these guys there. So I say keep the pressure coming. Maybe some alternative screws that can be turned as well, such as this funding thing that I floated there. But overall, Jillian, fundamentally, the law has to be enforced.
It's funny. Minnesota, I think, is 1% of the deportations that have occurred since the beginning of Trump's second term. Texas is like 20-something%. And the comparison of red states versus blue states with regard to how many people have been deported is vastly divergent, obviously far more in the red states. And yet you don't see this kind of chaos. And I find it odd, as several people have mentioned recently, including Joe Rogan and, oh my goodness, the guy from Shark Tank, Kevin, I think it's Kevin Leary, that all of a sudden, after you've got these massive fraud allegations coming out of Minneapolis, now you've got chaos in the streets. Do you think that there's a connection there, or is that super duper tin hat? Like, is this a massive organized distraction?
Look, I mean, DHS basically announced that they were going into Minneapolis right after the Somali fraud scandal broke into the national news, right? So this is a story in a few parts. So it was first Chris Rufo, who really breaks this story along with his colleagues at City Journal. And then Nick Shirley takes this thing to the whole next level with these YouTube videos there. And it was a few days after that DHS put out a tweet. I think it was like a Monday morning. It said like, "Good morning, Minneapolis," announcing that they were coming. So it was literally like A precipitates B. There was a direct causal connection there. So yeah, of course. I mean, you can't look the other way when it comes. I mean, by the way, what is actually happening like with the tap? I mean, what are people drinking in Minnesota? I mean, Minnesota was also ground zero of the 2020 anarchy. Yes. I mean, Minnesota was where George Floyd died there. I mean, all this started in Minnesota back then. So I don't really know exactly what's happening there on the ground, what's in the tap water, what people are doing and saying there in Minnesota there. But there's a clear proclivity towards anarchy and lawlessness. And yes, this fraud scandal, I think, is directly related to what we're seeing now. Another big question that I think is starting to get raised is, who is funding all this? I mean, clearly not all of it is organic.
That's where I'm going next.
Yeah. I mean, there's this climate change boondoggle called I think it's called the Sunrise Movement. It's like a very far left pro climate change group. The Washington Free Beacon did a whole expose on it a couple weeks ago. They become something of a slush fund, trying to get funding from the Soros Open Society Foundation, Tides Foundation, Ford Foundation, all these left-wing foundations. So a lot of these folks definitely are being paid the same way that the pro-Hamas garbage on campus after October 7th, a lot of that was paid. The left has a very well-oiled paid protest machine. I'm sure some of this is organic, but I think less of it is organic than most Americans realize.
Well, you know what? I work with a group. I'm writing a book on the ways in which essentially our government and our society has been co-opted by the four industries of ag, food, farm, and insurance. And they're called the Government Accountability Institute, but they're also the ones that were informing Donald Trump about the Neville Roy Singhams, the Alex Soros group, all the groups, your Tides Foundation, Arabella Network, everything you're talking about. So this one guy, Neville Roy Singham, he's actually an American, if you can believe it or not, but he's the same dude that's been funding everything from like the pro-Palestinian protests, the No Kings, all the anti-ICE stuff, or one of, right? And he's a billionaire from America, but he's connected to the CCP. Vincent Lowe, this is another one. I want to understand, is that not a crime? Like, if you're funding propaganda and you're paying for these signal chats and all the tents and the legal fees and the bail, you're essentially organizing what kind of appears to be a bit of an insurrection, honestly. They're literally going after, they think of law enforcement as not people here to protect us, but enemies of their state. Is there no recourse with the Alex Soroses, the Neville Roy Singhams, all these guys?
It's tricky. I mean, it is a fine line, right? I mean, a lot of this is protected speech. Not all of it is. I mean, personally, Jillian, I mean, this is just me personally.
Yeah.
I take the First Amendment very perhaps more literally than many do. So when I see free speech, to me, that's really free speech. Now, most lawyers, I think most judges interpret speech to also be most forms of conduct. I actually don't personally buy that. To me, conduct and speech are actually very different things. I think about the flag burning case. So in the late 80s, there was a case called Texas versus Johnson. You know, is there a First Amendment right to burn the American flag? And to me, the answer is no, because burning the American flag is not an act of speech. It is an act of conduct. And by the way, it's potentially a very dangerous act of conduct. Right. I mean, it's a fire, after all. There could be like hazards here. There could be arson, et cetera, et cetera. Sure. So, I mean, to me, again, you have a right to stand on a sidewalk and to say whatever crap you want to say. But if you are actively, personally taking measures that are not just speech, but conduct, and the conduct is geared towards undermining or obstructing the law.
But they Josh. They're funding these guys to go out there and wreak havoc, damage ICE vehicles, dox these agents. I mean, that's where I'm like, where is the line? When it crosses over into obstruction, you've laid out like, okay, we're not at treason, we're not at sedition, but we're at this lower level of what is still illegal. That's another one I don't understand. How come these guys are allowed to fund chaos? They're not just funding these kids chanting, death to America, whatever the heck they want to chant. They're obstructing. And so if this guy, Neville Roy Singham, came into the States, we couldn't arrest him. That would be a no-go.
Because he's funding stuff from overseas?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of a statute that would necessarily make that illegal. Okay. I mean, maybe it should be. I mean, that's interesting debate, right? I mean, should foreigners be able to fund American political activity? I mean, look, it's an interesting debate. It depends where you draw the line there. I personally take, I guess, call it more of an America first position there. I'm a little more skeptical of foreign meddling, foreign involvement in American electioneering, American politics in general there. But I'm not aware, Jillian, of anything that would make that conduct today necessarily illegal. But that might be a real reason to try to change the law, frankly. Okay,
because this guy was born in America, but he has connections to the CCP. And there are a lot of these guys who are foreign money, like Vincent Lowe. George Soros was not American. Anyway, okay. Don Lemon. Josh, this is a tough one for me. I don't like Don Lemon, but I think that they're going to make this guy a martyr, and I don't understand the difference between the right of free speech, then he's like interrupting somebody's religious practice. What is the law? Honestly, what do you think? Is a judge, a magistrate or something connected to a federal judge already said there's nothing there, but then I guess the DOJ went to a grand jury. It doesn't look great to me. What's going on with this?
So look, you have a right to do journalism, but you don't have a right to trespass on private property. I mean, there are multiple things going on here, right? So okay. I mean, good old fashioned investigative, leather shoe journalism, whatever. That's totally fine. But just because, it's well-established Supreme Court case law that just because a private place is generally open to the public, within the confines of reason and within certain local ordinances, you have the right to exclude who you want to exclude. That's kind of the whole purpose of private property, actually, is that the right of exclusion is kind of what defines a piece of property as being in private property. Now, there are some things that are a little different. So, for instance, there's common carriers. So airplanes, trains generally have to accept all customers. But if you're a church, you don't necessarily have to accept anyone in your door. So if you're there against the will and against the acceptance of the guy in charge, then you are trespassing there. And yes, there is a statute from the 1990s called the FACE Act, this Bill Clinton era statute, that specifically prohibits people from obstructing an active house of worship, an active prayer service there. So you have a First Amendment right to free exercise, and it seems to me that the people had that right undermined, which is the whole purpose of the statute, is to try to get at folks who would try to undermine that. That same statute, by the way, was actually weaponized by the Merrick Garland DOJ during the Joe Biden administration. They prosecuted in really tendentious, misleading, just malicious fashion. They prosecuted a lot of typically elderly folks, a lot of these grandmothers who are praying peacefully outside of abortion clinics on this same statute, on the FACE Act. There's another statute as well called the Ku Klux Klan Act, which goes back to Reconstruction in the 1870s. It basically criminalizes a conspiracy to try to attempt to deprive your fellow Americans of their constitutional rights, which again, to me, seems to fit exactly what happened here pretty well, because you have a group of people that are attempting to undermine your First Amendment right to free exercise there. So I personally am happy. By the way, I actually agree with you. This probably is going to be
it's just going to work for him. He's going to be a martyr of the cause. I'm like,
you're not wrong, but if the crime fits, I think the crime still fits.
You know, it's the same thing with Kimmel. It's kind of like nobody watched Kimmel. That's really
no, you're wrong about that.
That is the down low reason that they use that, is because he's getting paid a ton and his show costs a ton and the viewership isn't there and they didn't want to pay him out. I mean, that's the reality. And then all of a sudden, you made Kimmel a martyr and the whole freaking thing. And they're just, Newsom is begging. Haven't you seen him? Come get me, big boy. Like, he wants to be arrested. They want the optics. They're barging into, I can't remember what is it, Senator Padilla, who barged into the thing with Kristi Noem and wanted to be arrested and thrown to the ground. Like, they want to be the face of the resistance. All you're doing is taking a guy who got booted off of CNN, booted off out of his deal with X, and then he's becoming like the Nick Fuentes character of the left with that Jennifer Welch lady who's full of vitriol and madness, and you're making him a martyr. I don't know. I would have left Don Lemon to his Josh.
You know, Jillian, if nothing else, I think if they had left Don Lemon, it would have been a PR nightmare, because Don Lemon obviously is an adamant foe of the Trump coalition, and they were facing a ton of pressure there. And, you know, look, this DOJ, I've been personally defensive. I think that they've done generally a very, very good job. Okay. But there are a lot of folks in the Trump coalition who are less than fully confident in the DOJ. I think wrong. Again, I think there's actually a very good DOJ there, but there's a lot of folks who have been freaking out at the Epstein files, things like that there. So if they hadn't pursued what appears to me to be a legitimate case of the FACE Act and or the KKK Act, I think that this would have been kind of another self-inflicted PR nightmare as well. But, you know, look, Jillian, I mean, to me, it kind of comes down to this. For years when Joe Biden and Merrick Garland were in charge, they said over and over again how no one is above the law, right? That was the refrain when they were prosecuting Donald Trump, when they were prosecuting all these other individuals, you know, Peter Navarro, Steve Bannon, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, is no one above the law, or is Don Lemon above the law? I mean, again, ultimately, if the statute fits, I think the statute fits.
Okay, you know what? You make a great point. I guess I want the high ground, you know? And so it's like, I want to be above all of this. I want to focus on the stuff that matters. I want a resolution to this. I want the law to work on behalf of the people so it can de-escalate and put Preddy in jail, not 6 feet under. That's kind of what anyway, I so value your time and your expertise. Josh, where can people find you, watch you, listen, read your books? Tell everybody everything, all things Josh Hammer.
Jillian, I really appreciate it. So the Josh Hammer Show is a daily podcast. It's also available on YouTube at Newsweek's YouTube page, and it's also on the Salem News Channel every night at 10 p.m. My book is Israel and Civilization, The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. I'm also senior counsel for the Article 3 Project. We're at article3project.org.
Thank you so much, brother. I have a feeling I'll be reaching out again soon. So
I'm looking forward to it, Jillian. Take
don't
care.
block my text, Josh.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. And make sure to let me know what guests you want to see on in the future.